3:47 a.m. TechNova Solutions tower cut through the quiet darkness of Cedar Falls, Iowa. Marcus Thompson stood frozen in the blue glow of a computer screen on the 12th floor. His faded Navy janitor uniform told a story that nobody in this corporate building would ever guess. The server room hummed around him as lines of artificial intelligence code scrolled past. This was the same algorithm that 100 tech experts had failed to crack for 5 months. Cookie crumbs from his 8-year-old daughter's bedtime snack clung to his shirt pocket. In his calloused palm, a small USB drive caught the monitor's reflection. It contained something that could either save the company from a multi-million-dollar lawsuit or destroy everything he'd built in the shadows. The soft echo of heels clicked through the empty corridor behind him. Each step brought whoever it was closer to discovering his secret. A woman's voice cut through the mechanical hum with unexpected curiosity rather than anger. "What exactly are you doing with our main server at this hour?" Marcus turned slowly, his weathered hands instinctively moving to close the notebook beside the keyboard. The woman standing in the doorway wasn't security or management. She looked barely 30, wearing a simple gray hoodie and jeans that screamed late-night IT support. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she held a steaming coffee cup with the weariness of someone who lived on caffeine and deadlines. But something in her brown eyes told Marcus she wasn't just another tech worker pulling an all-nighter. She moved with a confidence that didn't match her casual appearance, stepping into the server room like she owned the place. "I could ask you the same question," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He closed the notebook completely, but not before catching her eyes, lingering on the complex diagrams visible on the open pages. The artificial intelligence bias detection system continued its endless loop on the main monitor, highlighting problematic patterns that had cost TechNova 3 major contracts. "Working late on the algorithm?" Marcus asked, testing her knowledge. Her reaction would tell him whether she was really IT support or something else entirely. The woman stepped closer to the monitors, her gaze sweeping over code that would make most people's eyes glaze over. She seemed to understand what she was looking at, which immediately put Marcus on edge. Cedar Falls might be home to the University of Northern Iowa, but finding someone who could read advanced machine learning algorithms at 4 in the morning wasn't exactly common. "I'm Sarah," she said, extending her hand with deliberate casualness. "Sarah Mitchell, started in IT support last week. Still trying to figure out why this system keeps flagging qualified candidates as high-risk hires." Her handshake was firm, but her palm was soft against Marcus's calloused skin. "Marcus Thompson," he replied, studying her face for tells. "Night custodial staff, for about 2 years now. I clean around these servers every night, so I've picked up a few things about what's supposed to be running." It was a careful half-truth, designed to explain his presence without revealing his background. Sarah's eyes returned to his notebook, filled with Marcus's cramped handwriting and technical diagrams that definitely didn't belong to a janitor. Mathematical formulas for bias detection algorithms covered entire pages, interspersed with notes about intersectional discrimination patterns and fairness metrics. "Interesting reading material for custodial work," Sarah observed, her tone carefully neutral. Marcus felt his chest tighten, but something in Sarah's expression suggested genuine curiosity rather than suspicion. "I read a lot," he said simply, though the words carried years of accumulated frustration from job interviews and networking events where people had made the same assumption. "University library has a good computer science section, free access for Cedar Falls residents." Sarah nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense, though Marcus caught a flicker of something that might have been understanding. "Mind if I take a look at what you've been reading?" she asked. "I've been trying to understand this system since I started, but the documentation is terrible." Against his better judgment, Marcus found himself nodding toward the screen. Sarah moved closer, bringing with her the faint scent of vanilla and coffee that reminded him of Sunday mornings with his wife, before everything changed. Her eyes scanned the code with an intensity that confirmed his suspicions about her technical background. "This bias detection module is looking for discriminatory patterns in recruitment data," Sarah murmured, more to herself than to Marcus, "but it's missing something fundamental. The intersectional analysis is completely wrong." Marcus blinked in surprise. Most of the senior developers at TechNova couldn't even pronounce intersectional, let alone understand its implications for algorithmic fairness. "You're right," Marcus heard himself saying, his caution overcome by the rare pleasure of talking to someone who actually understood the problem. The system treats each demographic category independently instead of understanding how they interact. A hiring algorithm might be fair to women and fair to minorities separately, but still discriminate against women of color. He pulled up a data visualization that illustrated the concept, his fingers moving across the keyboard with unconscious fluency. "See these hiring patterns? The algorithm approves white women and black men at normal rates, but black women get flagged as high risk at 3 times the expected frequency." Sarah turned to him with undisguised amazement, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. "Exactly, but how does a—" She caught herself before finishing the sentence, her cheeks flushing slightly pink in the monitor's glow. Marcus's jaw tightened as he recognized the familiar pause. How does a janitor understand advanced computer science? How does someone in a maintenance uniform know more about machine learning than people with computer science degrees? "I read a lot," he repeated, but this time his voice carried an edge of old pain. "Amazing what you can learn when you have time and motivation." The awkward moment stretched between them until Sarah's phone buzzed insistently with an urgent notification. She glanced at the screen, and her expression darkened as she read what appeared to be a legal brief. "The lawsuit depositions start tomorrow," she said quietly, almost to herself. "If we can't prove the algorithm is unbiased, TechNova could lose everything." Marcus knew about the class action lawsuit that threatened to destroy the company. 57 job applicants claiming discrimination based on race, gender, and age. The legal team was terrified, the stock price was plummeting, and rumors of massive layoffs circulated through the building like a virus. "What if I told you the algorithm could be fixed?" Marcus asked, the words escaping before he could stop them. The USB drive felt heavy in his palm, containing months of work that could change everything. Sarah's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips, steam curling between them in the cool air of the server room. "What do you mean, fixed?" she asked carefully, setting the cup down with deliberate precision. Her voice had changed, becoming more focused and intense. Marcus looked at her face, illuminated by the blue glow of the monitors, then at the USB drive that represented either salvation or career suicide. Every instinct told him to retreat, to grab his cleaning supplies and disappear into the maze of cubicles where he belonged, but something about Sarah's genuine interest and obvious intelligence made him take a leap of faith he hadn't taken in 3 years. "I mean completely rewritten," Marcus said, his voice gaining strength as he committed to the path. "Not patched or updated, but rebuilt from the ground up, with fairness as the core principle instead of an afterthought." He moved to the keyboard, his fingers hovering over the keys with muscle memory that betrayed years of serious programming experience. Sarah's eyes widened as she watched Marcus navigate through system directories with the confidence of someone who'd built similar architectures before. "The current system uses historical hiring data to predict future success," he continued, pulling up the algorithm's core functions. "But that data is poisoned by decades of unconscious bias. You can't fix bias by adding more bias detection on top of existing discrimination. It's like trying to remove salt from soup by adding more soup." His metaphor made Sarah smile despite the tension of the moment. "Show me," she whispered, her voice filled with curiosity and something that might have been hope. Marcus's fingers began to dance across the keyboard with a fluency that would have made the senior development team jealous. Lines of code appeared on the screen, elegant and purposeful in a way that spoke of deep understanding rather than trial and error. He pulled up the existing bias detection module and began highlighting its fundamental flaws, explaining how each function perpetuated the very problems it was designed to solve. "Look at this hiring prediction model," Marcus said, his excitement overcoming his caution. "It weights previous employee performance, but it doesn't account for the fact that historically underrepresented groups had fewer opportunities for advancement." Sarah watched in fascination as Marcus dissected months of work by highly paid engineers with the surgical precision of someone who understood not just the code, but the mathematics behind it. "This is incredible," she breathed, leaning closer to study his annotations. How long have you been working on this? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications about Marcus's true identity and capabilities. Every night for the past 4 months, Marcus admitted, his eyes never leaving the screen. I started noticing patterns in the system logs, inconsistencies that nobody else seemed to catch. He pulled up a data visualization that showed the algorithm's hiring recommendations overlaid with demographic information. The bias was stark and undeniable, like a map of institutional prejudice rendered in pixels and percentages. At first I thought it was just curiosity, Marcus continued, his voice growing quieter. But then I realized what was really happening to real people. Qualified candidates getting rejected for jobs they deserved, families losing opportunities because an algorithm couldn't see past surface-level correlations. The personal pain in his voice suggested this wasn't just academic interest. Sarah found herself wondering what Marcus's own story was. What had brought a man with his obvious talents to a night custodial job? Sarah's phone buzzed again, this time with a call from someone listed simply as board meeting. She declined it quickly, but not before Marcus caught a glimpse of her contact list filled with executive titles and legal department extensions. The brief view revealed names like General Counsel, VP Strategy, and Chairman Miller that definitely exceeded standard IT support access levels. You seem pretty well connected for IT support access levels. You seem pretty well connected for IT support, Marcus observed, his tone sharpening with suspicion and a hint of disappointment. Had he just revealed months of secret work to someone who might use it against him? Sarah's face flushed with what looked like guilt rather than embarrassment. I care about this company, she said defensively, but her eyes couldn't quite meet his. The lawsuit could destroy hundreds of jobs in a town that can't afford to lose them. Cedar Falls isn't exactly Silicon Valley. When TechNova struggles, the whole community feels it. It was a deflection rather than an explanation, but Marcus decided not to press. Everyone at TechNova had secrets, and he wasn't exactly in a position to judge someone else for hiding their true identity. Still, the discovery added another layer of complexity to their midnight encounter. The next 2 weeks fell into a strange rhythm of late-night encounters and cautious conversations that neither of them fully understood. Marcus would arrive for his 11 p.m. shift to find Sarah already at her desk in the IT department, surrounded by empty coffee cups and legal documents that definitely exceeded her supposed pay grade. She never asked him directly about his background, and he never confronted her about her mysterious phone calls and after-hours meetings with people whose names appeared on the executive directory. Instead, they developed an unspoken understanding built around their shared obsession with fixing the broken algorithm. Marcus began leaving carefully anonymized reports on Sarah's desk, detailed analyses that documented every flaw in the bias detection system, without revealing how a janitor could possess such deep technical knowledge. The reports were masterful pieces of technical writing, combining rigorous mathematical proofs with clear explanations of real-world implications. Sarah responded with insider information about the lawsuit's progress and technical specifications that should have been far above her security clearance. She shared depositions from affected job candidates, internal emails from worried executives, and quarterly reports that painted a grim picture of TechNova's financial future. They communicated through post-it notes stuck to computer monitors and brief conversations in empty break rooms, always maintaining the fiction that Marcus was just a curious janitor and Sarah was just an enthusiastic IT worker. But the pretense was wearing thin on both sides. Marcus's technical expertise was becoming impossible to disguise, while Sarah's access to confidential information suggested she was far more important than she claimed. Their collaboration was producing insights that neither could have achieved alone, combining Marcus's algorithmic brilliance with Sarah's understanding of corporate strategy and legal implications. The breakthrough came on a Thursday night when Marcus discovered something that made his blood run cold. Hidden deep in the algorithm's code was a subroutine that wasn't mentioned in any of the official documentation. It was elegant and subtle, designed to look like a standard optimization function, but actually implementing a scoring system that systematically penalized certain demographic markers. The code flagged candidates with addresses in predominantly minority neighborhoods, names that suggested non-European heritage, and graduation dates from historically black colleges and universities. This wasn't unconscious bias or algorithmic drift. This was deliberate, calculated discrimination, programmed into the heart of TechNova's hiring system. Marcus printed the evidence with shaking hands, his mind racing through the implications of what he'd discovered. Someone at TechNova had deliberately sabotaged their own hiring algorithm, creating the very biased problems that now threatened to destroy the company. The elegant maliciousness of the code suggested someone with deep technical knowledge and inside access to core systems. Marcus walked straight to Sarah's desk, abandoning all pretense of casual encounter. She looked up from her laptop, saw the expression on his face, and immediately cleared her screen of what appeared to be executive briefing materials. "We need to talk," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled anger and barely contained urgency. The printed code felt like toxic waste in his hands, evidence of a crime that could destroy careers and lives. "Not here," Sarah replied, glancing around the empty office with sudden paranoid intensity. The open floor plan that seemed friendly during the day now felt exposed and dangerous, full of security cameras and recording devices. "Conference room C on the 15th floor. 5 minutes." Marcus nodded and headed for the elevator, his mind already working through the implications of what he'd discovered and what it might mean for both of them. Conference room C was a glass-walled space overlooking the parking lot where Marcus's 15-year-old Honda sat next to Sarah's spotless BMW. The contrast between their vehicles told a story about their respective positions in the corporate hierarchy, though Marcus was beginning to suspect that appearances were deceiving. They settled into leather chairs designed for executives rather than janitors and IT support staff, the mahogany table between them suddenly feeling like a barrier rather than a workspace. Marcus spread the printed code across the polished surface like evidence at a crime scene, the elegant malice of the programming stark in black and white. "Someone programmed discrimination directly into the algorithm," Marcus said without preamble, his finger tracing the offending lines of code. "This isn't unconscious bias or system drift. This is deliberate sabotage, designed to create exactly the kind of discrimination we're being sued for." Sarah studied the printouts with growing horror, her technical knowledge allowing her to understand exactly what she was looking at. The code was sophisticated and subtle, the work of someone who understood both machine learning algorithms and legal liability. It would have been almost impossible to detect without the kind of deep system analysis that Marcus had been conducting. "This is Richard Chen's work," Sarah said quietly, pointing to a section of code with distinctive commenting patterns and variable naming conventions. "He was our chief technology officer until 6 months ago, left to join DataCore in Chicago, but he must have planted this before he went." Marcus felt the name hit him like a physical blow, old wounds suddenly tearing open with fresh pain. Richard Chen, his former supervisor at DataCore, the man who had destroyed his career and blamed him for a data breach that Richard himself had caused. The man who had stolen credit for Marcus's innovations while simultaneously undermining his reputation. "You know him?" Sarah asked, noticing Marcus's reaction to the name. His face had gone pale, and his hands were gripping the edge of the table with white-knuckled intensity. "We have history," Marcus replied, his voice carefully controlled but vibrating with suppressed emotion. "Very bad history that cost me everything I'd worked for." The pain in his voice was raw and immediate, suggesting wounds that had never fully healed. Sarah waited for him to continue, recognizing that whatever had happened between Marcus and Richard was central to understanding the current crisis. Marcus took a deep breath and began to tell the story he'd kept buried for 3 years. Richard Chen, as the charismatic CTO who'd hired Marcus as a senior engineer, praised his innovations publicly while stealing credit privately. The gradual erosion of Marcus's position, as Richard repositioned himself to take ownership of Marcus's most successful projects, the data breach that had exposed millions of customer records, caused by Richard's insistence on bypassing security protocols that Marcus had designed. The investigation that somehow concluded Marcus was responsible, despite evidence pointing to Richard's decisions. The choice between a humiliating termination and a public legal battle that Marcus couldn't afford to fight had destroyed my career systematically and thoroughly, Marcus concluded, his voice hollow with remembered pain. By the time I realized what was happening, He'd already rewritten history to make me the villain. I became unemployable in Chicago, blacklisted from every major tech company. I moved to Cedar Falls because it was far enough away that nobody would recognize my name, and TechNova hired me for the night shift because desperate people don't ask for references. Sarah listened with growing anger, recognizing the injustice of what had happened, and beginning to understand the personal stakes involved in their current situation. The pieces of the puzzle began clicking into place with terrifying clarity. Richard's sudden departure from TechNova 6 months ago, just as the bias problems began appearing. The timing of the lawsuit, perfectly positioned to create maximum damage to TechNova's reputation and stock price. The sophisticated nature of the sabotage, designed to be virtually undetectable while creating exactly the kind of legal liability that would destroy the company's value. He's trying to tank TechNova, Marcus realized, his voice filled with cold fury. Drive down the stock price so DataCore can acquire us at a fraction of our real value. It's corporate warfare disguised as algorithmic bias. Sarah's face went pale as the implications sank in fully. The board meeting tomorrow, she whispered, her voice tight with sudden understanding. They're voting on whether to settle the lawsuit or fight it in court. If they settle, it's basically an admission of guilt that will destroy our reputation permanently. But if they fight and lose, the damages could bankrupt the company. The elegant cruelty of Richard's plan was becoming clear. Either choice led to TechNova's destruction, creating the perfect opportunity for a hostile acquisition. Marcus had discovered not just sabotage, but a sophisticated corporate conspiracy. Marcus looked at Sarah across the conference table, studying her face as the professional mask finally slipped completely. The way she talked about board meetings and stock prices, her intimate knowledge of the company's legal strategy, her access to executive information that no IT support worker should possess. "You're not IT support, are you?" he asked quietly, though he already knew the answer. The question hung in the air between them like a challenge, demanding honesty after weeks of careful deception. Sarah met his gaze with a mixture of defiance and vulnerability, clearly struggling with how much truth to reveal. "I'm the CEO," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah Rodriguez, not Sarah Mitchell. I've been using a false identity for exactly 2 weeks, ever since the lawsuit forced me to go undercover in my own company." The confession seemed to drain her strength, leaving her looking younger and more vulnerable than her professional persona suggested. "When the bias problems started, I realized I couldn't trust anyone on the executive team. Too many people with too many motives to sabotage the investigation or profit from the company's destruction." Marcus absorbed this revelation with surprising calm, part of him having suspected something like this, given Sarah's obvious intelligence and inside knowledge. "So, you've been lying to me for 2 weeks, he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only a kind of weary understanding. "We've been lying to each other," Sarah corrected, her eyes meeting his with newfound honesty. "You're not just a janitor who reads computer science books, are you? Nobody develops that level of algorithmic expertise from university library visits." Marcus sighed and pulled out his wallet, extracting a bent business card that he'd carried for 3 years like a talisman of his former life. "Marcus Thompson, Senior Software Engineer, DataCore Solutions," he read aloud, the title feeling strange on his tongue after years of introducing himself as custodial staff. Until Richard Chen decided he needed a scapegoat for his own mistakes. He placed the card on the table between them, a physical symbol of the professional identity he'd been forced to abandon. "I keep it to remind myself of who I used to be, before everything fell apart." The irony of their situation wasn't lost on either of them. The CEO hiding from her own executives, and the engineer hiding from his past, both trying to solve a problem that neither could fix alone. But now, with their true identities revealed, they could finally work together, openly. "We can stop this," Sarah said, her voice filled with newfound determination and the authority of her real position. "Your analysis proves the sabotage, and my authority can implement the fix. But we have to move fast." Marcus nodded, already mentally preparing for the technical work ahead. "How long until the board meeting?" he asked. 18 hours, Sarah replied, checking her phone. "Think you can save a company by morning?" They worked through the night with an intensity that bordered on obsession, fueled by coffee, adrenaline, and the knowledge that failure would mean victory for Richard Chen's elaborate revenge. Marcus rewrote core sections of the bias detection algorithm, while Sarah prepared legal documentation that would expose the sabotage and clear TechNova of deliberate discrimination charges. The conference room became their war room, filled with empty coffee cups, crumpled papers, and the blue glow of laptop screens. Technical diagrams covered the whiteboard, mapping out the new algorithm's architecture and the forensic evidence that would destroy Richard's credibility. As dawn broke over Cedar Falls, Marcus finished uploading the new algorithm to TechNova's test servers. The bias detection system now functioned exactly as intended, identifying and correcting discriminatory patterns while preserving legitimate performance indicators. More importantly, it included a forensic module that could trace the source of the original sabotage directly to Richard's user account and timestamp his modification. "It's done," Marcus announced, his voice hoarse from exhaustion and too much coffee. Sarah looked at the test results with tears in her eyes, watching as the algorithm processed sample data with perfect fairness across all demographic categories. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the executive conference room on the 20th floor. Sarah changed back into her CEO clothes in the executive washroom, while Marcus gathered his cleaning supplies and prepared to disappear back into the building's invisible infrastructure. They had agreed that revealing Marcus's identity would complicate things unnecessarily, at least until they could properly expose Richard's sabotage. "Thank you," Sarah said as they stood together in the elevator lobby, her professional mask back in place, but her eyes warm with genuine gratitude. "I know this doesn't fix what happened to you in Chicago, but maybe it's a start." Marcus was halfway through cleaning the third-floor offices when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Board voted unanimously to fight the lawsuit. New algorithm proves sabotage. You saved us." He smiled and returned to his work, but the satisfaction was short-lived. At 10:15, Sarah appeared in the hallway looking frantic, her CO composure completely gone. "We have a problem," she said without preamble, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Richard Chen is here. He's claiming you stole proprietary code from DataCore and demanding that we fire you immediately." The confrontation took place in the same conference room where Marcus and Sarah had worked through the night, but now it was filled with hostile faces and corporate lawyers. Richard Chen looked exactly as Marcus remembered: perfectly styled hair, expensive suit, and the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never facing real consequences for his actions. He had brought 2 lawyers and a briefcase full of legal documents claiming that Marcus had violated his non-disclosure agreement and stolen trade secrets. "Marcus Thompson is a corporate spy," Richard announced to the assembled executives, his voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty. "Everything he's told you is a lie designed to cover up his own theft of DataCore's intellectual property." Sarah sat at the head of the conference table in full CEO mode, her casual IT worker persona completely erased. She wore a navy blue power suit that commanded respect, and her voice carried the steel of executive authority when she spoke. "Mr. Chen," she said with icy politeness that barely concealed her anger, "perhaps you'd like to explain why your former employee's code bears such a striking resemblance to the sabotage we discovered in our hiring algorithm." Richard's confident expression faltered for just a moment before recovering, but Marcus caught the flash of genuine surprise and fear that crossed his features. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Richard said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "I'm here to protect DataCore's intellectual property, nothing more. Thompson was terminated for cause after a major security breach, and any code he's shown you is stolen from my company." He gestured dismissively toward Marcus, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "You're harboring a corporate criminal who's trying to rebuild his reputation by sabotaging your systems, and then offering to fix them." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, threatening to destroy everything Marcus had worked for. Marcus stood slowly and walked to the conference room's whiteboard, his movements deliberate and calm despite the accusations flying around him. "Let me tell you a story about intellectual property," he began, his voice steady and clear as he picked up a marker. He began drawing diagrams that illustrated the data breach at DataCore, showing how Richard's careless security protocols had exposed millions of customer records. The funny thing about sabotage, Marcus continued, his technical expertise evident in every line he drew, is that it leaves fingerprints, code patterns, commenting styles, even the specific way someone structures their loops and conditionals. He turned to face Richard directly, his eyes blazing with 3 years of suppressed anger and vindication. Your code in our system matches perfectly with your work at DataCore. Not just similar patterns, but identical commenting structures, variable naming conventions, and even the same inefficient sorting algorithms you insisted on using, despite my objections. Marcus pulled up the forensic evidence on the conference room display, showing side-by-side comparisons that made Richard's authorship undeniable. The same sloppy security practices that caused the data breach you blamed on me. Richard's lawyers shifted uncomfortably as Marcus presented evidence that not only cleared him of theft charges, but implicated Richard in both corporate sabotage and fraud. The technical details were overwhelming and convincing, presented with the clarity of someone who understood every line of code intimately. The question, Marcus concluded, his voice carrying quiet authority, is whether Mr. Chen wants to explain his actions to this board or to the FBI's cybercrime division. Richard's face had gone completely white, his earlier confidence evaporating as the evidence mounted against him. You can't prove any of this, Richard stammered, but his voice shook with uncertainty and growing desperation. His lawyers were already packing their briefcases and preparing to distance themselves from their client as the evidence became overwhelming. Actually, we can, Sarah said, her voice cutting through Richard's protests with executive authority. She activated the conference room's main display, showing forensic evidence from the algorithm analysis that traced every modification to Richard's user account. We also have security footage of you accessing our servers during your final week at TechNova, something you forgot to mention in your initial testimony to our legal team. The aftermath was swift and brutal, playing out like a corporate thriller in the sterile confines of TechNova's executive conference room. Richard Chen was arrested for corporate sabotage, fraud, and violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, led away in handcuffs while his lawyers frantically tried to negotiate deals that no longer existed. DataCore's acquisition plans collapsed when their own board learned about their CTO's illegal activities, triggering a corporate investigation that would destroy several careers. TechNova's stock price recovered completely when news broke that they had not only solved their bias problems, but had actually been the victims of deliberate sabotage, painting them as heroes rather than villains. Marcus found himself in the surreal position of being offered Richard's old job as Chief Technology Officer, complete with a salary package that would have seemed impossible just 48 hours earlier. The offer came with a corner office, stock options, and the kind of professional recognition he'd dreamed of during his darkest moments as a night janitor. I can't take it, Marcus told Sarah during a quiet conversation in her real office, surrounded by the executive trappings that she'd hidden so well during their late-night encounters. I appreciate the offer more than you know, but I have responsibilities that come first. He pulled out his phone and showed her a picture of 8-year-old Lily, grinning gap-toothed in her school uniform with a science fair ribbon pinned to her shirt. She needs me home during the day, and I can't risk another situation like DataCore. Power and prestige don't mean much if you lose everything that really matters. Sarah studied the photo with a thoughtful expression, seeing the fierce protectiveness in Marcus's eyes when he talked about his daughter. What if we created a position that worked around your schedule? She asked carefully. Chief Ethics Officer, part-time, focusing on algorithmic fairness and corporate responsibility. The compromise they reached was unconventional, but perfect for both of them. Marcus would work 20 hours a week on AI ethics and bias prevention, attending meetings and consultations during Lily's school hours when she was safely in class. He would keep his night custodial position, partly for the comprehensive health insurance, and partly because he'd discovered that some of his best insights came from the quiet hours when the building was empty and his mind could wander freely through complex problems. Besides, he told Sarah with a grin that transformed his usually serious face, someone needs to keep the real CEO honest about what's happening in her own company. 6 months later, TechNova had become the industry leader in algorithmic fairness, with other companies paying substantial consulting fees to learn their bias prevention techniques. Marcus's story had been featured in Wired magazine and Harvard Business Review as a case study in hidden talent and corporate responsibility, though he'd insisted on keeping Lily's name and photo out of all publicity. The notebook that his wife had given him in college now sat in a place of honor on his new office desk, filled with diagrams and equations that were helping to reshape how artificial intelligence made decisions about human lives. The most unexpected development was the genuine friendship that had grown between Marcus and Sarah, built on shared experience and mutual respect rather than corporate hierarchy. Their shared experience of hiding their true selves and working together through crisis had created a bond that transcended their professional relationship. Sarah often stayed late to help Marcus with his evening custodial rounds, claiming that the physical work helped her think through strategic problems. Marcus had become her most trusted advisor on technical matters, the one person in the company who could challenge her decisions without political motivation or personal agenda. On a quiet Thursday evening in December, as snow fell gently outside the windows of TechNova's 20th floor, Marcus finished uploading the latest version of their bias prevention software to the company's client portal. The algorithm now served customers across 3 continents, processing hundreds of thousands of hiring decisions each month with fairness as its primary directive. Sarah sat across from his desk, reviewing quarterly reports while absently munching on cookies that Lily had baked for Miss Sarah during her latest visit to the office. The child had become a regular presence in the building, doing homework in Marcus's office while he worked and charming everyone from security guards to board members. "Penny for your thoughts," Sarah said, noticing Marcus staring out at the falling snow with a contemplative expression. The question had become a ritual between them, a gentle way of checking in during their evening conversations. "Just thinking about how strange life is," Marcus replied, his voice filled with wonder at the turns his path had taken. "6 months ago I was invisible. A single dad with a criminal record and a custodial job, trying to keep my head down and protect my daughter from my failures." He gestured around the office, at the awards on the wall recognizing his contributions to AI ethics, and the photos of Lily's latest school achievements. "Now I'm giving keynote speeches about artificial intelligence ethics and consulting with companies around the world," Marcus continued, still amazed by the transformation. "Lily's college fund is finally secure, and she's proud to tell her classmates that her dad is helping make computers more fair to everyone." Sarah smiled and closed her laptop, preparing to join Marcus for their weekly ritual of evening custodial rounds. "You were never invisible," she said quietly, her voice filled with the wisdom of someone who had learned to see past surface appearances. "You were just in the wrong place for people to see you clearly." She gathered her things and prepared to leave, but paused at the door with the question that had become their Thursday night tradition. "Want some help with the evening rounds?" she asked, just as she had every week for the past 3 months. Marcus nodded, grateful for the company and the conversation that would carry them through another night of work in the building where they had both learned to stop hiding from who they really were. Together they walked through the empty corridors, past the cubicles and conference rooms where Marcus had once worked, unnoticed and unappreciated. Their friendship a testament to the power of seeing beyond appearances to the truth of what people could become. As they worked side by side, cleaning offices and checking systems in the quiet building, Marcus reflected on the strange turns that life could take when courage met opportunity. A single USB drive had changed everything, but not in the way he'd expected. It hadn't just fixed an algorithm or saved a company or even restored his professional reputation. It had revealed the truth about who people really were when stripped of their titles and pretensions, when forced to rely on their intelligence and integrity rather than their position in the corporate hierarchy. The story of Marcus Thompson and Sarah Rodriguez became legend in Cedar Falls and beyond, a reminder that innovation and justice could come from the most unexpected places. Tech industry publications wrote about the janitor algorithm, and business schools created case studies about hidden talent in corporate environments. But for Marcus, the real victory wasn't in the recognition or the job title, or even the financial security that had finally allowed him to stop worrying about Lily's future. It was in the knowledge that sometimes, when the night was quiet and the building was empty, a person with determination and a dream could change the world one line of code at a time. proving that true expertise had nothing to do with job titles, and everything to do with passion, intelligence, and the courage to act when action was needed most.